Some of the wealthiest people in America aren't high earners. Meanwhile, countless people making six figures still feel financially stuck. At first, that doesn't make sense. More income should create more wealth. Yet over and over, we see people with ordinary salaries quietly building substantial net worth while others earn far more and never seem to get ahead. Which raises an uncomfortable question. What if a small salary isn't the biggest obstacle to building wealth? What if the real obstacle appears after people start earning more? I'm Mike. I've spent years studying personal finance, investing, and the psychology behind wealth, and one pattern kept showing up. The people who quietly become wealthy often aren't the highest earners. On this channel, we uncover the hidden forces that shape money and financial behavior. So if that's something you're interested in, consider subscribing. Because the story you're about to hear starts with an ordinary salary and ends with a result most people never expect. Meet Sarah. At 25 years old, Sarah lands her first full-time job earning $42,000 a year. Nothing about her situation looks extraordinary. No wealthy parents, no inheritance, no secret investing knowledge. Just an ordinary salary and an ordinary beginning. If you met her back then, you probably wouldn't have predicted anything remarkable about her financial future. Then there's Jason. Jason is the same age, but he starts his career earning $65,000 a year. From the outside, Jason appears to have every advantage. More income, more flexibility, more room for mistakes. And unlike Sarah, his career takes off quickly. Within a few years, promotions start arriving. His salary grows, his confidence grows with it. Friends begin asking him for career advice. Family members talk about how well he's doing. By almost every visible measure, Jason looks successful. And Sarah notices. It's hard not to. While Jason is upgrading apartments and celebrating promotions, Sarah is still driving an aging used car and carefully weighing everyday expenses. Sometimes she wonders if she's being too cautious. Sometimes she wonders if everyone else understands something she doesn't. After all, Jason isn't reckless. He's not drowning in debt. He's not making obviously bad decisions. In fact, if you had to choose which of them was more likely to become wealthy, Jason would seem like the obvious answer. And for a long time it looked like he was. Which is exactly what makes this story so interesting. Because what happened next reveals one of the most misunderstood truths about wealth. For the first few years, Jason's life looked exactly how most people imagine success should look. Each promotion seemed to confirm he was on the right path. His apartment got nicer. His car got newer. His weekends became more interesting. When friends suggested trips, he could afford to go. When new restaurants opened, he didn't need to check his bank account first. Life felt easier. And honestly, it should have. He had worked hard for it. The upgrades weren't reckless. They felt earned. That's what made them so easy to justify. A slightly better apartment, a slightly newer car, a few extra conveniences, a few upgrades that made daily life more enjoyable. Individually, none of them looked like mistakes. In fact, most people would probably make the exact same choices. And from the outside, the results were hard to argue with. Jason looked successful. His lifestyle reflected his growing income. People noticed. Some even envied him. Meanwhile, Sarah's life looked far less impressive. She rented a smaller place, kept driving her aging car, delayed upgrades she could technically afford, not because she was trying to become rich, not because she enjoyed budgeting. She simply preferred keeping her life uncomplicated. But there were moments when that choice felt difficult. One evening, she attended a gathering with several friends from college. The conversation quickly turned toward promotions, travel plans, and new purchases. Jason was there too. People congratulated him on his latest raise. Someone joked that he was becoming the successful one in the group. Everyone laughed, including Sarah. But on the drive home, a question stayed with her. What if she was being too cautious? What if everyone else was right? What if she was sacrificing today for a future that might never arrive? Because at that moment, Jason didn't just look wealthier, he looked happier. And if you had compared their lives right then, almost nobody would have chosen Sarah's path, including Sarah herself. Which is exactly why what happened next surprised everyone. For several more years, Jason's life continued moving in the right direction. At least, that's how it appeared. His income increased, his lifestyle improved alongside it, and every raise felt like proof that he was making progress. Most people would have responded the same way. After all, what's the point of earning more money if your life never improves? So when Jason received a raise, he adjusted. A better apartment, a newer vehicle, more convenience, better experiences. Nothing extreme, nothing irresponsible. Just small improvements that felt perfectly reasonable. And because each upgrade happened gradually, they barely felt like changes at all. That's what made them so powerful. Nobody wakes up one day and decides to double their lifestyle overnight. The process is much quieter than that. It happens one decision at a time, one subscription, one upgrade, one monthly payment, one convenience. Each individual choice feels insignificant, yet together, they slowly begin building a new normal, and once something becomes normal, it's surprisingly difficult to imagine living without it. Jason never thought of himself as someone spending too much money. In fact, if you looked at his budget, most of his decisions seemed completely justified. The problem wasn't any single purchase. The problem was that every improvement quietly increased the amount of income his life required. Meanwhile, Sarah's income was increasing too, not as quickly as Jason's, but steadily. And each time she received a raise, she followed a simple pattern. She allowed herself a small upgrade. Then she saved or invested most of the rest. There was no celebration, no visible sign of progress, no dramatic change anyone could notice, which created a strange situation. As the years passed, Jason looked increasingly successful, while Sarah looked almost exactly the same. If anything, the gap between them appeared to be growing. Jason's life looked larger. Sarah's life looked smaller, and from the outside, the scoreboard seemed obvious. Jason was ahead. At least that's what everyone thought. 10 years into their careers, the difference between Sarah and Jason looked impossible to ignore. Jason's salary had crossed 6 figures. He owned a beautiful home. His vacations were better. His lifestyle was larger. His career seemed to be accelerating every year. Meanwhile, Sarah's life still looked surprisingly ordinary. She wasn't struggling, but she wasn't displaying the obvious signs of financial success either. No luxury purchases, no dramatic upgrades, no visible transformation. And if you had met both of them at that moment, you probably would have reached the same conclusion most people did. Jason had figured something out. Sarah had not. Even Sarah occasionally wondered if that was true. By now, she had spent years making careful financial decisions, years choosing patience over immediate rewards, years investing money that could have been spent elsewhere. And yet her life still looked remarkably normal. Sometimes she questioned whether all the sacrifice was worth it, because that's one of the hardest parts about long-term wealth building. The rewards arrive quietly, the doubts arrive immediately, and for a while, it seemed like those doubts might be justified. If this story had ended there, Jason would have been the clear winner, the higher income, the larger lifestyle, the more impressive life. Case closed. But the story didn't end there, because just as Jason's future seemed most secure, something changed. Not a market crash, not a financial disaster, not even a recession, just uncertainty, the kind that arrives slowly enough for people to ignore it at first. Projects in Jason's industry began slowing down. Promotions became less frequent. Management grew unusually quiet. Rumors started circulating. Nothing alarming, just enough to make people uncomfortable. Most employees brushed it off. Jason did too, until one Monday morning, he opened his inbox and saw an email with a subject line that immediately caught his attention. Mandatory team meeting. No explanation, no details, just 4 words. And for the first time in years, Jason felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time: uncertainty. The meeting turned out to be less dramatic than Jason feared. Nobody was laid off, not yet. But management delivered a message that was impossible to ignore. Growth was slowing, budgets were tightening, the company was becoming more cautious. For most employees, it was simply another corporate update. For Jason, it lingered in the back of his mind, because for the first time in years, he started looking at his finances differently. Not through the lens of income, through the lens of obligation. His mortgage payment wasn't optional. His car payment wasn't optional. His subscriptions weren't optional. His lifestyle wasn't something he occasionally enjoyed. It was something he had to continuously support. And once he noticed that, he couldn't unsee it. The strange part was that none of those expenses felt extravagant anymore. The house felt normal. The car felt normal. The monthly costs felt normal. In fact, most of them no longer felt like upgrades at all. They simply felt like life. Which reveals something fascinating about human psychology. The things that once excite us rarely stay exciting for long. The larger apartment eventually becomes just an apartment. The newer car eventually becomes just transportation. The upgrade becomes the baseline. And once it becomes the baseline, losing it feels far worse than gaining it ever felt. That's why lifestyle inflation is so powerful. Not because people are irresponsible, because people adapt. What once felt like luxury quietly becomes necessity. Jason wasn't fighting spending habits anymore. He was protecting a lifestyle that had slowly become normal. Meanwhile, Sarah faced the same economic uncertainty. The same headlines, the same rumors, the same questions about the future. But her experience felt different, not because she earned more, not because she knew something nobody else knew, because she needed less. Her expenses were lower, her savings were larger. And over the years, she'd quietly created something most people don't think about until they need it: margin. The distance between what she earned and what she required. And that margin changed everything. Because uncertainty feels very different when you have room to breathe. For the first time, a subtle difference between Sarah and Jason began to emerge. Not in income, not in lifestyle, in flexibility. And flexibility would soon become far more important than either of them realized. At first, the difference was almost impossible to notice. Sarah continued investing month after month. Nothing dramatic, nothing exciting, just a series of ordinary deposits repeated over and over again. If you had looked at her investment account during the early years, you probably would have been disappointed. Sarah often was. The growth felt slow, sometimes painfully slow. There were months when the market fell. Months when progress seemed invisible. Months when she wondered whether all the effort was making any meaningful difference. Meanwhile, Jason's choices continued producing immediate rewards. His upgrades were tangible, visible, enjoyable. Sarah's investments were mostly numbers on a screen. And numbers on a screen are rarely as exciting as real life. But then something began to change. Not overnight, not all at once, slowly, almost quietly. Sarah noticed that her investment growth was starting to contribute more than it had before. At first, nearly all of the money in her account came from her own contributions. Now, the growth itself was becoming noticeable. The gains were generating additional gains. And for the first time, her money was doing something unusual. It was helping, not replacing her paycheck, not transforming her life overnight. Just helping. A little at first, then a little more. And that's when Sarah realized something most people never experience, because they quit too early. The beginning of wealth building feels almost invisible. The middle begins to feel inevitable. Meanwhile, Jason was experiencing a different kind of compounding. Not investment compounding, lifestyle compounding. Every raise had funded new obligations. Every obligation required future income. Every increase in lifestyle reduced flexibility. The changes had been so gradual that he barely noticed them happening. Until now. And once uncertainty entered the picture, those hidden differences became harder to ignore. One evening, Sarah reviewed her finances, not because she was worried, because she was curious. As she looked through the numbers, something surprised her. For the first time in her life, she realized she could go several months without a paycheck if she absolutely needed to. The realization wasn't exciting. It was calming. She hadn't become rich, but she had become resilient. Jason made a similar discovery around the same time. The difference was that his realization felt very different. When he reviewed his finances, he wasn't asking how much freedom he had. He was asking how long he could maintain the life he'd built if his income changed, and the answer was far shorter than he expected. For years, both of them had been building something. Sarah had been building options. Jason had been building obligations. Neither of them fully understood the consequences yet. But they were about to. The difference became clear during a conversation neither of them expected to matter. A former colleague invited Sarah for coffee. During the conversation, he mentioned an opening at a small company he had recently joined. The work sounded interesting. The mission excited her. The only problem was the pay. The position would come with a significant salary reduction. A few years earlier, Sarah would have dismissed the opportunity immediately. Now she found herself seriously considering it. Not because the lower salary didn't matter. Because for the first time she had room to choose. Her savings could absorb the transition. Her investments continued growing. Her lifestyle didn't require every dollar she earned. The decision wasn't easy, but it was possible. And possibility is powerful. Around the same time, Jason faced a different opportunity. A competing company approached him with a role that offered more flexibility, less stress, and work he found genuinely interesting. There was just one catch. The salary was lower. Not dramatically lower, just enough to make the numbers uncomfortable. For several days, Jason considered it. The role appealed to him, the lifestyle appealed to him, the freedom appealed to him, but when he looked at his finances, the decision became obvious, or at least it felt obvious. His mortgage required a certain income, his lifestyle required a certain income, his obligations required a certain income. The flexibility he wanted simply wasn't available to him, so he declined. And for the first time, a thought crossed his mind that he couldn't shake. What if a high income and financial freedom weren't the same thing? Because from the outside, Jason still looked more successful. His house was larger, his salary was higher, his lifestyle was more impressive. Yet Sarah possessed something he didn't, the ability to choose. And choice is often invisible. You can't photograph it. You can't post it on social media. You can't park it in your driveway. But when life presents an unexpected opportunity, its value becomes impossible to ignore. That's when Sarah began understanding what she'd really been building all those years. Not an investment account, not a savings balance, not a net worth figure. She had been building flexibility, the ability to respond to life instead of reacting to it, the ability to make decisions based on what she wanted rather than what she needed. And once you experience that kind of freedom, it changes the way you think about money. Because money itself stops being the goal. What money allows you to do becomes the goal. The strange part was that neither Sarah nor Jason had reached the end of the story yet. In many ways, the most important years were still ahead of them. And that's where the gap between their paths would begin widening faster than either of them imagined. 20 years after starting their careers, Sarah and Jason were both doing well. Neither had become a billionaire. Neither had achieved overnight success. Neither had experienced some life-changing financial miracle. From a distance, both appeared successful, but if you looked more closely, a very different picture emerged. Jason was still earning a strong income. In many ways, he had achieved exactly what he set out to achieve: the house, the career, the lifestyle, the external signs of success. Yet something interesting had happened along the way. Every raise had improved his life, but every improvement had also increased the amount of income required to maintain it. Over time, success had become expensive, not financially devastating, just demanding. His lifestyle still depended heavily on his continued ability to earn. And after decades of working, the idea of stepping away felt difficult. Not because he lacked talent, not because he lacked discipline, because the life he had built required constant support. Sarah's situation looked different. Her lifestyle had certainly improved over the years. But her expenses had grown far more slowly than her income. The gap she created in her 20s never disappeared. It expanded. Year after year, raise after raise, investment after investment. And eventually, something remarkable happened. Her money began contributing a meaningful share of her financial progress. Then an even larger share. Then larger still. The process had been so gradual that she barely noticed it happening, until one day she realized a simple truth. Work had become a choice, not a requirement. She could continue working. She could reduce her hours. She could pursue something new. She could take time away. She could say no to opportunities that didn't align with the life she wanted. For the first time, her future felt genuinely flexible. And that's when the difference between wealth and income became impossible to ignore. Jason earned more. Sarah possessed more freedom. Most people spend their lives assuming those two things automatically travel together. Often they don't. Because wealth isn't measured only by how much money passes through your hands. It's measured by how much control you have over your time, your decisions, and your future. And that's what makes Sarah's story so surprising. She didn't build wealth through extraordinary intelligence. She didn't discover a secret investment. She didn't take huge risks. She simply protected a gap. The gap between what she earned and what she spent. Then she gave that gap something most people struggle to provide: time. And time did what time has always done. It multiplied small advantages. Not overnight, not dramatically, but relentlessly. Looking back, the most important financial decisions Sarah made never felt important in the moment. They were small, almost forgettable. A purchase she decided not to make, an upgrade she delayed, a raise she partially invested, a lifestyle expense she chose not to adopt. Individually, they looked insignificant. Collectively, they changed the trajectory of her entire life. which leads to one of the most misunderstood truths in personal finance. Most financial futures are not created by a handful of massive decisions. They're created by thousands of small decisions repeated consistently over time. The problem is that those decisions rarely feel important while they're happening. The consequences arrive years later, sometimes decades later, and by then, the pattern has already been written. That's why the question isn't whether your financial habits matter. The question is what they're quietly building. Because every financial choice creates a direction. Every recurring expense creates a future. Every habit compounds into something larger, whether we notice it or not. And perhaps that's why the biggest obstacle to building wealth isn't a small salary. Maybe the biggest obstacle is assuming that a higher income automatically solves the problem. Because if Sarah and Jason taught us anything, it's this. Income determines how much money enters your life, but behavior determines how much freedom remains. And in the end, freedom may be the most valuable form of wealth there is. And maybe that's why so many people misunderstand wealth. Because they spend years focusing on income while overlooking the habits that ultimately shape their future. Sarah never earned the highest salary. She never found a shortcut. She never experienced a financial miracle. She simply made thousands of small decisions that gave time a chance to work in her favor. And that's what makes her story so powerful. Because it suggests that wealth isn't reserved for extraordinary people. It's often built by ordinary people doing ordinary things consistently for an extraordinarily long time. So before you ask how to earn more money, it might be worth asking a different question. What financial habits are quietly shaping your future right now? If you enjoyed this video and want more insights into the psychology of money, investing, and wealth building, make sure to subscribe. And until next time, remember, the financial decisions that feel small today often become the outcomes that define tomorrow.